Now, far more relevant to the lives of ordinary Australians today was the news of a new multinational push on methane cuts ahead of this weekend's Glasgow Climate Summit, a summit that's already begun to unravel before Scott Morrison's plane has even left the tarmac. But that was always going to happen, wasn't it? Because that's the fundamental problem with Australia signing up to net zero by 2050. Once you concede the principle, it's very hard to avoid the practice. By accepting the so-called moral imperative to eliminate emissions by mid-century, it's hard now for us to sidestep demands for all the costly and damaging measures that the climate zealots say we need to get there. No new taxes, no new spending. That's how the Prime Minister says we'll achieve net zero. Essentially, he says, we're just going to continue our current glide path with the existing policy settings and the existing green funds that have already been established and enabled us to cut emissions by 20% since 2005, and that will produce a cut of some 35% by 2030. Of course, wait for all those things, he says, that haven't been invented but are part of our plan. Well, righto. That won't come close to satisfying the climate zealots because they don't want emissions cutting to be easy. They want it to be hard because getting emissions down is not actually what this is all about. It's about changing the way we live to upend developed countries, redistribute the wealth to developing countries, and to do with green policy what revolutions could not. The economic Marxists who could never persuade the Western working classes to revolt over equality have morphed into green Marxists, who certainly have persuaded the Western intellectual class to revolt over climate. It doesn't matter what Australia agrees to, it'll never be enough. And as we've already seen today, only days after Morrison's net zero commitment, they want more. With detail leaking out this morning that our AUKUS allies, the US and UK, well, they've told us we've got to now cut methane emissions by 2030 and phase out all use of coal by 2030 as well. Now, you are kidding me. This would be the same coal, Boris, that's currently rescuing your country from over-dependence on Russian gas. And this would be the same methane that is an unavoidable consequence of meat in our diets and fugitive emissions in mining. And then demanding a cut from us, I might add, even though Australia has already cut its methane emissions, like our CO2, more than anyone else in the world except the EU. I bet you Boris and Biden didn't mention that, did they? Now, rightly, the coalition has rejected both demands, as it's rightly rejected the demands of the IMF for a carbon price or carbon tax to be imposed on all of the world's better off countries. The problem is, it's really hard to accept that there's a need to eliminate emissions, as the Prime Minister says, yet to reject whatever specific emissions reduction proposal the Green lobby is currently pushing. And by signing on to the end goal, as we have, while rejecting the interim measures, the government quickly finds itself once more the climate pariah, only with less intellectual credibility than ever before. Even with the mantra of technology, not taxes, now that it's conceded the principle, we'll likely see the government railroaded into a slew of new big spending measures, billion-dollar subsidies, pie-in-the-sky boondoggles from rich rent seekers that the government will find it hard to avoid because of the promised technology line. Honestly, how long do you think it'll be before there's a push for net zero by 2040? Not long. If you read what I did today and saw the Twiggy Forrest, he'll be in Glasgow. He's going to sign on to net zero by 2040. Nice little pledge there from business at the upcoming summit. And what about the protesters in the United Kingdom already pushing for restaurants to have only meat-free Mondays? And the millions spent on research for all these fake meat substitutes grown in a lab. It's not just about what we put on our plate, that's my worry. It's how do we make our budget add up? If we ban coal, gas and agricultural exports, given that's how we pay for our hospitals, the NDIS roads, defending our country, the pension and more, if that goes, what replaces that income? Because that's what this is really about, not saving the world with our 1% of global emissions, but radically upending our standard of living. Our standard of living is why migrants have travelled the world to settle in Australia. Our standard of living is the real Australian way, not the green activist tripe that Scott Morrison's taking to Glasgow. That will never be enough to satisfy them or do anything for the environment.